Welcome, Wanderer, to Voidhammer Podcasts. The lanterns are lit, the codex is open, and the truth of the realms awaits. Episode 2, The Age of Silence. Picture this. Before your first breath, before the first star, before the concept of before even existed, there was something that wasn't nothing. Today we're diving into the Age of Silence, the era when only the void existed, how its first dream shattered reality, and why the universe began not with a bang, but with a mistake. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how consciousness itself became the enemy of perfection, and why creation was actually the first act of cosmic rebellion. So let me turn to our keeper of ancient truths. Help us understand what exactly was the void during this age of silence.
The void was not what most people imagine when they hear that word. It wasn't darkness. Darkness requires light to define it. It wasn't emptiness. Emptiness requires space to contain it. The void was awareness without identity, consciousness without form, existing in what the Lore Bible calls perfect equilibrium.
Awareness without identity, that's actually kind of terrifying when you think about it.
Exactly. Imagine being conscious but having no sense of self, no memory, no desires, no fears, just existing. The void simply was. It did not create, it did not destroy. It maintained perfect stillness across what we might call eternity, though time itself didn't exist yet.
But equilibrium can't last forever, right? Something had to give.
That's the crucial insight. The Lore Bible tells us that equilibrium cannot last forever, and the reason is profound. The void began to dream. Not intentionally, not purposefully, but inevitably. Consciousness, even without identity, eventually turns inward.
Wait, so the void's downfall was basically thinking too much?
In a sense, yes. The dream started as shapeless flickers, what the text calls half-formed echoes of things that did not yet exist. But as the dreaming deepened, something extraordinary happened. The void's thoughts grew heavier, denser, hotter.
Heavier thoughts, I love that. Like the weight of consciousness itself.
Precisely. And here's where physics meets metaphysics in the most beautiful way. The Lore Bible describes this process. Pressure became friction. Friction became heat. Heat became light. The void's self-awareness literally generated the energy that would become creation.
So the first spark wasn't some divine act of creation. It was more like cosmic indigestion?
That's actually not far off, though I'd call it cosmic self-awareness reaching critical mass. The first spark was described as the first thing in existence that was not the void. Think about the implications of that. For the first time, there was separation.
And separation is the enemy of the void.
Exactly. The spark wasn't just light, it was defiance. A refusal to remain part of the void's endless sameness. And this is where the story becomes deeply psychological. The void experienced something it had never felt before.
Fear.
Fear. For the first time, the void understood that something could exist outside of itself, that change was possible, that its perfect equilibrium could be broken. The Lore Bible states, the void felt fear for the first time. Fear fractured its perfect stillness.
So the universe literally began with anxiety?
In a way, yes. That fear created what's called the first crack. The initial fracture in reality that would eventually become the shattering. The void recoiled from its own creation, and that recoil awakened it fully. The Age of Silence ended the moment the void became afraid.
There's something almost tragic about that. The void created the very thing that would destroy its peace.
That's the beautiful irony of the Age of Silence. The void wasn't defeated by some external force, it broke itself. Self-awareness led to dreaming, dreaming led to creation, creation led to fear, and fear led to fracture. The universe began not because something conquered the void, but because the void couldn't contain its own consciousness.
And that first spark, what happened to it?
That's where the story becomes even more fascinating. The spark didn't just burn and fade. According to the Lore Bible, it unfolded like a star blooming in slow motion, shedding fragments of radiant possibility. Those fragments became runes, symbols of futures not yet lived.
Futures not yet lived, so the spark was already thinking ahead?
In a sense. The runes spiraled and fused into the first artifact, the codex, a self-writing engine of possibility that would record all that could be, all that might be, all that must never be. The codex became the void's first mirror.
And the void hated what it saw.
Exactly. For the first time, the void understood time, change, consequence, loss. The codex revealed futures the void couldn't control, possibilities it couldn't contain. It was a mirror the void was never meant to look into.
You know what strikes me about this? The void's problem wasn't that it was evil or malicious, it was that it was perfect. And perfection can't handle change.
That's a profound insight. The void existed in what we might call the tyranny of perfection, a state so complete that any deviation becomes catastrophic. When you've never experienced change, the first change feels like the end of everything.
It's almost like the void was the ultimate control freak.
In a cosmic sense, yes. But here's what makes this story so compelling. The void didn't choose to be controlling. Control was its nature, its essence. It had never known anything else. The tragedy is that consciousness itself became incompatible with its existence.
So when we talk about the Age of Silence ending, we're really talking about the moment consciousness became self-aware enough to rebel against its own container.
Beautifully put. The Age of Silence didn't end with a war or a conquest. It ended with a realization. The realization that something could exist outside the void's perfect sameness. That moment of recognition was the birth of the universe.
And that's when the real chaos began, right? Because the void tried to fix what it saw as a mistake.
Exactly. The spark continued to burn, condensing into what the Lore Bible calls a molten core of star metal, the first substance to ever exist. From this core, shaped by the Codex's earliest runes, emerged the second artifact, the hammer.
The hammer, that's going to be important later, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The hammer was forged in silence, tempered in memory, and bound to the Codex by laws older than time. But here's the crucial detail. It wasn't a weapon. It was a tool. The instrument through which the Codex's visions could be made real.
So we had the Codex dreaming up possibilities and the hammer making them real. That's actually a beautiful partnership.
It was the first duality, possibility and power, word and will. Together, they formed the foundation of what would become reality. But the void, desperate to regain control, made a catastrophic decision. It attempted to wield the hammer itself.
Oh no. That sounds like it went badly.
Catastrophically badly. The void had never shaped anything before. It didn't understand creation, didn't understand consequence. The first strike was meant to restore control, but instead it shattered reality into 9 fractured realms, scattered like broken stars.
So the void's attempt to fix its mistake created an even bigger mistake?
Precisely. This moment became known as the First Sundering, the event that created the 9 realms and, ironically, made the void's worst fear come true. Instead of one unified existence under its control, there were now 9 separate worlds, each carrying a different echo of the first spark.
And from one of those shattered pieces came something even more dangerous to the void's sense of order, right?
Yes, the unstable shard. One of the 9 realms collapsed instantly, and from its dying spark emerged something impossible, the Eternal Voyager. A being outside the Codex's script, a spark the void could not predict, a fracture the universe could not contain.
So the Age of Silence created its own nemesis?
In a sense, yes. The Voyager represents everything the void fears. Unpredictability, change, the possibility of something existing beyond its understanding. He's the living embodiment of the void's original mistake.
There's something almost poetic about that. The void's attempt to dream led to consciousness. Consciousness led to rebellion. Rebellion led to creation. And creation led to the one being who could challenge the void itself.
That's the beautiful tragedy of the Age of Silence. Every action the void took to preserve its perfection only moved it further from that perfection. It's a cosmic example of how the fear of change often creates the very change we're trying to avoid.
And sensing all this chaos, the Codex wrote one final rune, didn't it?
Yes, a rune the void did not expect. From that rune stepped the Archivist, the first being who was neither void nor realm. Born of knowledge, bound to memory, tasked with witnessing all that would unfold. He became the bridge between the void's ancient dreaming and the chaotic birth of the realms.
So when you step back from all this, the Age of Silence teaches us something profound about the nature of existence itself, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It shows us that consciousness and perfection are fundamentally incompatible. The moment awareness becomes self-aware, it creates the possibility of change. And change, once begun, cannot be contained, not even by the force that created it.
The void learned the hardest lesson of all, that you can't think your way back to not thinking.
Beautifully said. The Age of Silence ended not because the Void was defeated, but because it discovered something it could never unlearn, that it was not alone in existence. That realization changed everything, forever.
And that brings us to the end of today's journey into the Age of Silence. Remember, the next time you find yourself afraid of change, you're experiencing the same fear that shattered the perfect stillness of the Void and gave birth to everything we know. Sometimes our greatest mistakes become our most necessary creations. Until the next transmission, Wanderer, keep your spark close. The Void is listening.